Well, gee, isn't this great weather compared to last week? We had about 25 miles going east, and it was a little tough in there once in a while. That's patchy fog, if you remember, Woo. But we made it. We made it safely. We're excited that you're here. Last week, we had 117 of you show up. Pretty good for foggy weather. That's great. We're going to start with prayer tonight. This is Randy, it's McDonald, right? Pastor Randy McDonald. He takes care of the youth here. Most of you obviously know him. He's going to open us with prayer.
God, we come to you tonight, and we are so appreciative of this Joshua project. God, I have learned so much, and I'm excited to see what we continue to learn in the coming weeks. God, I ask that you just give us all an opportunity not only to learn, but to share what we learn with others. And God, I want it to be intentional. I want you to put people in our path that we can share what we believe and what we're learning. And God, I ask that you just open up our hearts and our minds tonight to receive exactly what it is that we need to receive. And God, let us leave here better off for your glory. And God, we want to give you all the glory. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
My first introduction to Randy was when I came 3 weeks ago to your church service on Sunday morning, and there was this guy tickling the ivories up there playing old Southern gospel songs, and I went, well, I got to get to know that guy, because we'd just been to the Gaither group had their concert over in Kansas City, Missouri, and we'd gone to see them, and then here I come in, and he's up there wailing away on that. That was great. Last week, if you'll remember, you gave applause to one of our folks that helps out, and his name was Steve Bloomquist. Remember, he was the Air Force Academy guy that does helicopters, right? Well, about 4 weeks ago, he had a minor heart attack, and they put a couple of stents in, and so he was okay because he came, right? So about 4 or 5 days ago, he started not feeling well, and he had a stroke. And so he's been in the hospital, but now he's just rehabbed for the first day. So I'd like to offer just a little prayer for Steve, if you'll join me, please. Lord, we thank you for this brother that's helped us all out so much and comes and supports and encourages all of us. We pray for his health, and we pray that you'll help him to improve, help him to get full ability back in his left side so that he'll be ready to come back and help us out. We pray for his wife, Debbie, who helps out here also, that she'll be able to have good strength to help him and work with him. Lord, thanks for Steve and Debbie, and we pray that you'll be with them this evening and the days ahead. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Everybody said? Amen. Amen. All right, tonight, we got to get going here. This is going to be an exciting night. This is great, because we're in the last day of the first week of creation, only week of creation, actually, and we're on the backside of it, and we're talking about Adam and Eve and humankind. That's us. And the only thing I want you to think about, because you're going to see a few things that go over my head a little bit with some DNA and think genetics a little bit, but I want you to think past that so that you don't go, I have to make an A on the test. I want you to just think about design and complexity. Could this happen by chance, or was there a designer behind what I am observing? Tonight, we're going to do that, take a break, and then we're going to hit evolution hard, and the presenter tonight is going to be Dan Aldrich. You remember Dan? And he'll take care of you and move through things quickly, but give you good explanation. So, Dan, are you ready to roll? Oh, yeah, you got the clicker. You may have the clicker. There you go. All right, let's hear it for Dan. Let's go.
By the way, last week, I'm not really sure what we were doing with the clicker we had.
Sport coat on.
Yeah.
He's presenting.
No, it's because my wife laid it out for me. I just put it on. Any smart husband does that. So I see a flat version of me on the bed sometimes, and I know what that means. You know what I'm saying? You husbands know what I'm saying. Wives do for sure. So when we get to humankind, this is about you. This is a really special day because it's the final day of creation. And here we have the creation of you guys, all of us, from Adam and Eve. We can't be too proud of Adam and Eve, the way things ended up. However, we were created like him. And look at these verses, let us make man in our image. Well, you know, this first chapter of Genesis is so full of Trinity references, it's kind of crazy. You know, with Elohim at the beginning and, you know, all these references. Here we go. Our image, meaning God is many but one. So here we are, and we're made according to their likeness, the Trinitarian likeness. Let us have dominion. Let these people that we're going to make here have dominion over the fish, the sea, the birds of the air, over the cattle, over the sea, the land animals, all of them, the dinosaurs, all animal kind, right? And everything that creeps on the earth, even the worms. They're yours to steward, Adam and Eve. So God created man in his own image, and in the image of God he created him, and he created him male and female. A synopsis, what happens in the second chapter, where we see Eve made the last great gift of God is, of course, womankind. That happens in the second chapter. All you ladies, that's true. So we're made in his own image. He made us male and female. That's important for propagation. And then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over all the living things that move on the earth. God saw that everything he had made, and it was not just good, but it was, that's right. So we blew it up, but it was really awesome at one time. And that's the evening and the morning and the sixth day. I'm sorry I can't get millions of years in there because there's over 400 references to Yom with a morning and an evening, and they all mean a 24-hour day. And if you were confused on that, you can look in Exodus. It says in 6 days God created everything. So here it is. So in how many days did God create everything? Not, yes, but you'll always get tricked by somebody. They'll say 7. No, it's 6 because the 7th is for rest. So what about you guys? Well, Genesis 2:7 says, he formed us people out of dust from the ground. I'm sorry, but you're just dirt. We are. And if you look at the composition of soil, common soil, it looks very much just like you add water and some protein. There you go. So you really are just dirt. And you know how fine-tuned this is? How many of you guys take vitamins? Oh, I'm short on my magnesium today. Do you think that's all by chance? No, it's specifically tuned for a life like ourselves. It's an amazing statement, but you are dirt. I'm sorry, but it's true. Well, what about this little thing? You hear deoxyribonucleic acid. It's a molecule that stores information. That's what DNA is. That's what it is. It's a molecule designed specifically to store enormous amounts of information and retrieve it and zip it and unzip it, and it runs in 2 directions. You're going to learn some really crazy stuff about DNA that's inside of you. You won't believe. And I'm sure Darwin and other people like that had no concept of this, could not have hundreds of years ago. So here we are looking at this special thing inside of you. By the way, what are 2 non-material things material processes cannot create on their own that are in DNA? Well, a language. There's even another one for RNA. It's different than the DNA one. And a bunch of structured information that makes you, makes little cells that become tissue, that become livers and hearts and kidneys and eyes, and they all have their own specific instructions. And by the way, DNA is in every living thing. It's in your plants as well. But it's an amazing statement to creation because none of this is possible in a materialistic worldview like I used to have. So let's talk about these molecular machines. This is what goes on to support the cell. This supports the DNA within your body. And this is how information is copied from one cell to the next to propagate these cells. As cells die off, they have to be replaced. Let's watch this video of the micro machines at a molecular level that are inside of you doing this work.
DNA is a good place to start, the double helix molecule we always talk about. This is a scientifically accurate depiction of DNA created by Drew Barry at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research. If you unwind the two strands, you can see that each has a sugar phosphate backbone connected to the sequence of nucleic acid base pairs, known by the letters A, T, G, and C. Now, the strands run in opposite directions, which is important when you go to copy DNA. Copying DNA is one of the first steps in cell division. Here, the two strands of DNA are being unwound and separated by the tiny blue molecular machine called helicase. Helicase literally spins as fast as a jet engine. The strand of DNA on the right has its complementary strand assembled continuously, but the other strand is more complicated because it runs in the opposite direction. So it must be looped out with its complementary strand assembled in reverse, section by section. At the end of this process, you have two identical DNA molecules, each one a few centimeters long, but just a couple nanometers wide. So to prevent the DNA from becoming a tangled mess, it is wrapped around proteins called histones, forming a nucleosome. These nucleosomes are bundled together into a fiber known as chromatin, which is further looped and coiled to form a chromosome, one of the largest molecular structures in your body. You can actually see chromosomes under a microscope in dividing cells. Only then do they take on their characteristic shape. Otherwise, the DNA is more strewn inside the nucleus. The process of dividing a cell takes around an hour in mammals, so this footage is from a time lapse. You can see how the chromosomes line up on the equator of the cell. Now, when everything is right, they are pulled apart into the two new daughter cells, each one containing an identical copy of DNA. Now, as simple as this looks, the process is incredibly complicated and requires even more fascinating molecular machines to accomplish it. So let's look at a single chromosome. One chromosome consists of two sausage-shaped chromatids, containing the identical copies of DNA made earlier. Each chromatid is attached to microtubule fibers, which guide and help align them in the correct position. The microtubules are connected to the chromatid at the kinetochore, here colored red. The kinetochore consists of hundreds of different proteins working together to achieve multiple objectives. In fact, it's one of the most sophisticated molecular mechanisms inside your body. The kinetochore is central to the successful separation of the chromatids. It creates a dynamic connection between the chromosome and the microtubules. For a reason no one's yet been able to figure out, the microtubules are constantly being built at one end and deconstructed at the other. While the chromosome is still getting ready, the kinetochore sends out a chemical stop signal to the rest of the cell, shown here by the red molecules, basically saying this chromosome is not yet ready to divide. The kinetochore also mechanically senses tension. When the tension is just right and the position and attachment are correct, all the proteins get ready, shown here by turning green. At this point, the stop signal broadcasting system is not switched off. Instead, it is literally carried away from the kinetochore down the microtubules by a dynein motor. That's the walking guy. This is really what it looks like. It has long legs so it can avoid obstacles and step over the kinesins, molecular motors that walk in the opposite direction.
That's inside of you guys, right? Now, you know, it was amazing how billions of years it took the walking guy to have two legs. You know, he hopped for a while, and then, no, you can't even divide a cell without all of these components at the same time. There's information. There's actually a language that's being used and translated. There's these molecular machines, sub-molecular machines that are doing these ridiculous things inside your body. How many times does that process happen in dividing cells in your body per second? Anyone want to guess? Spencer, what do you think? If you go for 70 trillion cells in your body, if you're a bigger person like myself, or if you're smaller, you would have less cells, obviously, that on average, 23 million times per second, 23 million times, Gary, that happened. Not only that, this is where mutations come from, copying errors, right? But think about this, the code's running in two directions, it has to be unzipped by a little dynein motor that's going around, and it's unzipping it, it's interpreting all this information, it's putting it all back together, it's wrapping them up in these little stick-like things called histones and storing them away so it can pull them out, and there's this interpretive capability inside the cells to say, I need this piece of information, and it goes and gets it, unwinds it, and gets it, and takes it and uses it for what's needed at just the right time. And so RNA comes into some of those components too. But that's what's going on inside. So how much data can you put in DNA? This is the latest stuff here for you. So if you go to Statista or some of these other places, you'll see we're looking at about 70 zettabyte. Whew, what's that mean, right? Okay, 70 trillion gig. Okay, you're starting to get an understanding. How many of you guys have like a gigabyte, a gig version of memory in your Xbox at the house or your PlayStation? Or, you know, that's a gig. If you get 1,000 of those, you get a terabyte. And some of you guys have terabyte-sized drives in your Xboxes, not just like the 500 gig ones, but you have the 1 terabyte ones. Well, then you have 1,000 gig in that. All right? There are 70 billion terabyte in the world of data today. That would be, if we had used a terabyte phone, you know, like the real expensive iPhones or smartphones that have a terabyte of data. You got one of those? You got a terabyte? All right, here's what he's got one. Can you hold that up so they can see it? There's a terabyte smartphone. It would take 31,806,250,000 pounds of those to store the world's data. If you stacked them, and they are roughly 0.3 inches, a third of an inch thick, you get about 342,000 miles worth of these stacked, like pancakes. I'm trying to build up to something. Can you tell? Okay. So, have fun with this. Robert Glass, the guy over there in the Swiss Federal Institute, he says, you know what? We can easily get 475 exabyte into a gram of DNA now. There's actually studies that show it's a lot more. A lot of my friends that work in data say that DNA is probably the best place to store. If we have a storage problem for data technologically, it's probably the best material to store information in. It's unbelievable. You need 70 billion terabyte of data. Well, that means you just need 4 ounces of DNA material to carry all of that information that's in the world. That's a quarter cup. You know, when you're making brownies or whatever, there's a quarter cup. You have a quarter cup of DNA material, you could store the world's data in it. Now, is that chance or design? Do you think there's a natural process to not only explain the information, but the storage of it, the interpretation of it, the data copying processes, and the correction of errors found as much as it can from a chance-based perspective over billions of years or something? Not a chance. Not a chance. In fact, Richard Dawkins, leading evolutionist, actually has a degree in chicken pecking behaviors, but we're not going there. Listen to what he thinks about DNA. Of course, this is before he kind of realized what he'd said, and so he's kind of recanted on some of this, but listen to this.
In biology, I suppose it would have to be the double helix, the Watson and Crick discovery of the structure of DNA, which was far more than just the discovery of the crystallographic work, discovering the structure of a big molecule. Because what that led up to was a major revolution in which much of biology became a sort of branch of information technology. The consequence of the Watson-Crick discovery, with all that it led on to, the DNA code and the sort of various genome projects that are going on now, is that genes, which from my point of view are absolutely central to biology, genes are information, they're coded information. It even looks like computer information. I mean, a chromosome is a great long computer tape. It's linear, runs one-dimensional, digital code. It's not binary, it's quaternary, but apart from that, it's just the same as computer tape. It's read in sequence. It's copied and pasted from one part of the organism to another in just the same way as a computer programmer would copy and paste.
I just don't think that you realize the kind of stuff that's going inside of you, do you? It's an amazing thing that God has done. It is the invisible things, the things that we would not have known were going on until modern technology that tell us that we were created. Obviously designed, obviously beyond what we would ever have even imagined. The more we learn from atomic microscopes and the more we learn from the Webb telescope, the more we realize there is a capital G word involved in this thing. In fact, Einstein at the end of his life said, the more I study this stuff, the more I believe there is a God. I mean, he himself read these types of things. Sir Fred Hoyle, he's your nucleosynthesis guy, cellular nucleosynthesis guy. Yes, he did say that the chance that you guys, with your complex created abilities that are inside of you, biologically, physically, mentally, everything else, the chance of that happening by chance and time is about the same as a tornado going through a junkyard and building a flight-ready 747, including its crew fueled up and ready to go with a flight plan. Yes, ma'am.
Can't hear you in the back.
You guys can't hear me?
No, your mic's off.
It is? Wow, it sounds pretty good to me. Can you guys hear me right now? How about now? Oh, is that better? Can you hear that? Okay. Well, I'm howling, so, hey, turn me down, man. I mean, now we're going to be an issue for somebody. Well, thanks for turning me up there, too. So that's, this is even a minimalistic view of that. Now that we know more about DNA and information, we know that it's even more ridiculous to think that this happened somehow by chance. What about your heart? So our friend Steve Bloomquist dealing with some of this. 60,000 miles in your circulatory system. It beats itself 100,000 times a day, has its own electrical pulse and system. Your heart does. If that's why a heart can keep beating after a person's not there, or the baby has a different heart than the mother. It's because the heart has its own electrical system. It beats 100,000. It can pump 60 million times or gallons of blood over your lifetime. That is enough to fill up your car 3 million times. You think that's a chance thing? Not a chance. How about your brain? Well, 300 years of HD video storage, like if you have a DVR at home and you're like, I'm going to have to clean this thing out because I've been recording this show, and, Well, how about you can just go ahead and store whatever you wanted for the next 300 years high-definition video. That's what it's capable of, 2.5 petabyte. And, it has the processing power of 10,000 of Dave's smartphones here combined, but yet it weighs less than 4 pounds. And it runs on less than a 15-watt light bulb. That's your brain. 100 trillion connections, instantaneous response times are near using an advanced electrical system. That's your brain. Just by chance, right? That's just, it just took millions of years for you to have that. I love reading about Anthony Flew, who was an atheist and probably the president of his science club and everything, like myself when I was in school. And he said, I now believe there's a God. So he's alive at the time they're finding all this new stuff all the time. And he says, I think this evidence points to, especially when we understand there has to be a creative intelligence entirely based on DNA alone. You have to admit this. This material shows that it's unbelievably complex and arranged in such a way. He doesn't even go into the fact that material process can't create a language or information itself to interpret it. But he says we need a higher intelligence to do this. So he figured it out. And we'll see him most likely in heaven, from what I understand. What about the human eye? Here's looking at you. Can you guys see it? You guys see the eye there? It's kind of creepy, actually. But, here we have a quote, to suppose that the eye, with all its complexity, I'm going to use some big words there, for adjusting focus, different distances, admitting light in different variations, correction for spherical and chromatic aberrations, this could not be formed by natural selection. In fact, I freely confess it's absurd in the highest degree that could have possibly happened by some kind of iterative process. Who said that? Charles Darwin, 1872. That just didn't get into the textbooks, but this is about 10, 12 years after he's going to write some of his other books. But he himself considered this the highest form of proof that we were dealing with a created humankind. Well, I kind of like this since we're talking about DNA all the time here. It's these invisible attributes you see once you start understanding the information. I believe this was written, of course, by the Holy Spirit, and it was written in such a way that the more we know, the more this comes to truth. Here we have some blood cells, by the way. By the way, if they were shaped any differently, they'd clog themselves up and they wouldn't tumble along through your arteries just right. There's all kinds of crazy stuff about the design of blood cells, but here you are. Here's another one for you that I always thought was amazing about blood while we're here. What if we didn't have the clotting ability of blood right out of the gate? What if that evolved? And Adam would have died the first, time he went to grab something and cut his finger on something. He would have bled to death. I mean, you got to have, there had to be all these things in place at the same time. But these things, now we're starting to clearly see these invisible things. Even his eternal power, his Godhead, so that they, being the world, being us unsaved, when we were unsaved, or we hadn't thought about these things, were without excuse. Although they knew God, they didn't glorify him, nor were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts. Come on, man, how many things have you guys heard recently that it's like, you guys have lost your mind? I mean, they are just completely against common sense, against even scientific laws like entropy, which means things fall apart over time, right? No, and you just have all these different types of sexes among even plants and humans. No, there's just two there. Sorry, that's basically what genetics teaches. But here they became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And they get so dang smart, they get stupid, don't they? And we're living in this world of Romans 1:20 through 22. Well, this is more of what Charles Darwin was saying to us. And what we should say together, would you read this with me? I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. Psalm 139:14. You know that the youngest kid in here, who can think and reason, to the oldest, knows that they were created when they start seeing the real information about how magnificent his creation was when he made you. Amen? That is the end of day 6. So questions about this information? Some of the younger guys have to deal with this and come out of the world where I did with public schools and all that, being told that they went from goo to zoo to you. That's just not true. It's true. Thoughts? Didn't mean to put you on the spot. No, you just ate chili a little while ago. I did too. It was awesome. Was the chili awesome? Who makes this stuff for you guys? Dean, Dino. Who else? Okay, I think you guys should give Dean a hand and those that help, because I'm just blown away by it. Yes, sir. I have a question right here.
Yes, sir.
Yes, my brother.
I have a, not broken bones, but I took a flying leap and jammed up. My knee would get flat like this, and I guess it just jammed everything up like this.
To your hip?
Oh, everything up here. And what, 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago on a Wednesday. It's very, very sore, all the way down to my ankles, all the way up in front, my thigh muscle, all the way up here, my hips in the back of my hip, and then my groin. They pulled my groin, hamstring, and sciatic nerve, all at one time. Well, my question is, with the cells and everything else, this came to me. I says, is my healing going on right now, and how is it going? How is it happening right now?
And it is. It was. But guess what happens when we get older? That slows down. That's, well, brother, we're getting there, you and I both. Entropy is real. Those cells and mutations over time, building up in the human genome, make us not what we used to be. Adam and Eve would have really been able to do some pretty special things. And okay, go ahead. I'm right here. You go ahead.
I'm 86 plus years old.
All right.
Okay, now, is that going to take years for me to heal, or?
Well, it would depend on the situation, but you know what? He would heal you on this side of heaven or that. I know that's true.
Lay your hand on
No,
here.
let's go. Go ahead. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I think it was interesting, information-wise, that all the information we've got, all these terabytes, et cetera, in computers is with ones and zeros.
That's
The
right.
code that we've got here has 4 letters,
That's right.
so which magnifies the amount of information that can be produced.
That's right. And RNA is different than that. And it runs in 2 directions. Think about this. In fact, the way it's stacked with the histones and is wrapped, the way they align actually means something we're finding out in what we used to call junk DNA. And it's not junk DNA. It determines timing, everything. In fact, we really can't find much of it. When I was an evolutionist, we needed junk DNA, you see, lots of it. Because we needed, this didn't work and it failed, and so we tried again. And this didn't work and it failed, and we tried again. And the more we're understanding, we're up over 80% of this understanding that this information in DNA and RNA controls all kinds of crazy things. Epigenetics is another interesting situation, like things that are above the genetic information, things like behavioral things, like the mice that were studied at Georgia State. That so you've got a mama and dad mouse, and they waft cherry blossom smell into their cage, and when they do that, they give them a little shock. And so when they smell cherry blossoms, they start freaking out. They're going to get shocked, right? Well, they leave these 2 mice alone. They have baby mice, Mises. No, that's not really right, but you know what I mean. I hate Mises to pieces. Sorry, I watched too many cartoons when I was a kid. But they take the baby mice as soon as they're born, and they give them to 2 different parents that are raised there. They start growing up. They get into maturity, these young mice, and they waft cherry blossoms into the cage, and these babies raised by different parents freak out. So there's an emotional component or other components called epigenetics, just means above the genetic information. Isn't that fascinating? So you carry things with you that maybe your great-great-grandparents struggled with or something. Yes? Go ahead.
You know, Boeing used to be down in Wichita, and I was just thinking they could have saved a lot of time and effort had they just known about this tornado and junkyard thing.
Yeah, that's right. You know, there's a Tonganoxie joke in there somewhere. You know, how you guys always hear that around here.
We got one more back here.
Yes. Well, this is more fun than I had even hoped. I was hoping you would interact with me. It's no fun to stand up here with a suit coat on and talk about evolution or, you know, whatever, and not have any friends to talk to. Go ahead.
Okay, I had a question about the graphics that you used to show the DNA.
Yes, that's right.
And we're so used to seeing things that are speculative. So I
Yes.
was wondering how they produce those graphics.
Oh, wow. That's a good question.
And how
Yeah,
much
so
of that
atomic
is-
microscopes actually, and subatomic microscopes, but atomic microscopes have really brought this thing to where it is. They can actually see these mechanisms. If you ever want to watch some interesting videos about what goes on inside a cell, look up James Tour. He does some really wonderful stuff. He literally creates nanomachines that do things at a molecular level. And yeah, we have the technology to do that. It's almost like the more technology we have to see deeper into things, or as Dave would do when he presents the cosmos, the farther out we can see, the more you have no excuse to recognize that there's something of great intelligence behind it all that sits outside of time, outside of space itself, and outside of matter itself, because it has to manage it, form it, create it, set the laws for it. He has to set outside of time, space, matter to do that. So, I mean, that's just all there is to it. I mean, you can deny that all you want, but you cannot show me a material process. It creates a complex language, complex information that gets a bunch of amino acids and proteins together in just right order to create a single cell of tissue. And it has the information to know, I need to get together with this tissue over here because we're going to be lungs. Think about that. By chance, good luck with that. Yes.
I'd like
Okay,
to
she's got
add,
another
as a
question.
non-science person,
Yes.
those, if you were listening very carefully, which I've seen this 25 times and you've seen it once, but the gentleman, you remember the stick people walking along there with
Yes,
their legs
uh-huh.
pick up? Remember he said, this is exactly what it looks like
That's right.
under the atomic microscope. So kind of to answer your question a little more like, that I would understand it is, what you saw up there is pretty darn accurate to the way it really is. Now, I don't know about the colors of things, back to the dinosaurs again, but I don't know. Do you know anything about colors, either one of you guys?
No,
Dave's over there too, so.
Nope, I do not know what color they are, but he did say in his video, we've made these green to point out where they are and what they're doing. But just imagine these guys, their job is like, okay, when you guys are ready, let me know. And so there's a tension pulling between these fibers that are going between these two cells. And when the tension starts growing to the point where the information has passed from one to the other, they know it somehow. Now, come on. And then they start walking. Okay, well, by the time we get there, it'll be time to disconnect. I'm going to be on the other side, boys. I'll see you on the flip side. And they walk across and become part of the new cell. Yes. Is it Kari?
Yeah.
Hey, Kari.
Has DNA been able to be changed yet?
Yeah, they actually can take little snippets out of it and monkey around with it. But good luck trusting that. Because, we don't even know what 80% of it does. So you start monkeying around and cutting and pasting on your own, you can really blow up some stuff. I remember, Dolly, the sheep, she didn't last too long, all kinds of problems, health problems, and she was just straight up a copy. But go ahead.
Have we ever seen a positive mutation?
Well, that's really good. So I'm actually going to talk about mutations here. But we'll cut into the evolution presentation a little bit, but I won't have to talk about it later. But mutations can have a short-term gain for an animal as it adapts within its kind, to survive. God built these triggers into the DNA to turn on and off certain features, right? And so you have, as long as it's in a kind, so it's a bear. you know. Or it's, I'll give you a good one, salmon. I love to use salmon because I like to eat salmon. And I don't have a problem eating things not made the same day we were, especially chicken and fish. They don't seem to look back at you, so I'm okay with that. That doesn't bother as much as other things. But salmon are euryhaline. They can handle a vast array of salinity in their system, and they can get rid of it. They can go from salt water to fresh water and make it. And bull sharks can do it too. They just caught you guys see they caught like a 1,100-pound bull shark outside of St. Louis going up the Missouri River. Whoo! You know, I'm not, you know, those kids that were swimming off their dock, you know, you might want to rethink that situation. But these animals, or these salmon, Lake Michigan has a really great example of this, where over just a few generations, these salmon had come in from the ocean, had migrated into Lake Michigan, and they put up a dam or closed a dam, a lock, and they were kind of trapped in there. Well, over a few generations, these salmon adapted, mutated to more fresh water. Anybody have an do aquariums in here? Come on, man, nobody at all? Okay. You can take a saltwater fish, and over time, a lot of them, there's certain species that are really good at this, you can make them more freshwater to eventually not saltwater at all over time. They mutate, yes, they can mutate, or they have the ability within their systems to do it. But over generations, they certainly can. So this is a mutation that's positive. But what happened, do you think, when they opened those gates to the ocean again several years later? Those salmon went out there and they died. They got a short-term gain out of a mutation, but they lost information, right? And here's a good example. How many of you guys have a mixed breed dog at home? I have one. Okay, all right. Or a cat, or any type of animal, right? Can you ever breed that dog back to a purebred name? No, why? Because you lost information. You see, you don't have all the full encyclopedia poodle anymore. You have half of it with half Wheaten Terrier like myself, for example. So I can't ever get all the way back there. Can they ever go all the way back to the wolf kind or the canid, the original canid kind? They can't. They lost information along the way. Those are mutations that may have even been favorable for a short-term gain, but in the long term, they die. Polar bears came from the grizzly bears. They're going to die because they've lost the ability to eat berries and fruit and things like that. They have to have a high-calorie, high-protein diet of seal. So the seals disappear, so they start dying. But what you're going to find is, you know, it's like, you know, everybody phone in now and save a polar bear. You know, you've seen those commercials. You know, I have news for you. He mutated, and he can't eat that stuff anymore that he used to when he was a grizzly. Yes. This is more fun than I had even ever hoped. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so maternal twins, triplets, you've heard stories that they get separated at birth, they get raised different, and then they find each other later on, and their lives are almost parallel.
Yeah,
Is it
epigenetics is a
have-
good answer to that, potentially. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? That's in there too, but we don't even know how to even manage or study it. We're just learning from mice that got zapped, you know, right now and things like this. But that's a good point. Yes, sir?
We got people on hearing that say that we could actually be hacked as a human being.
Yes, yeah, you could. You'd make a real mess of it. These babies and things that they're monkeying around with to try and determine sex and things like that. You know, we weren't made to monkey around with that stuff. And we're going to find out real soon, within a generation or two, some of the things that have been done with genetics that were a horrible experiment on humankind. Yes?
So what's your thoughts on Elon Musk's new chip he put in a human's head?
Well, you know, he's a technology guy. He'd love to rack, stack, and track you. And so would all the businesses in the world to know what you buy and what impulses, you know, make you, what song being played makes you want to go buy a box of chocolates and everything else. So, yeah, that's just people trying to use technology for some, what he would say is probably good, and he probably believes that. But, yeah, I'm the other way around. I
One
mean, you
last
know, we were
question.
so much better off when we were Adam and Eve than we are now. And you're going to learn that here when we do entropy and everything else. Yes. Go ahead, brother.
Good evening. So, I grew up in the sciences too. So
There you
this
go.
kind of really hit home for me. A few years ago, my son was born with hypoplastic left heart and a aortic arch that basically was hanging on by a thread. And so as my son was in the womb and developing, I mean, you're looking at 9-10 months of development, and he had open heart surgery at day 6 of life. My son's 2.5. He runs, he plays, he does everything just like a normal kid. And I'm sorry, but I can't help but think that genetics from a creator are not just going to change their behavior so that the left side of his heart keeps up with the rest. And it's not going to do it on its own. So if you don't believe in the power of prayer, you ought to.
I say amen to that. Let me.
You want to comment on that? You want to comment on that, or are we ready to go to break?
It's up to you guys.
No, on that.
Oh well, you know, yes, God does miraculous things. He still does. He's not limited, even though we might have beliefs or thoughts that He's still the eternal King of the universe, and He can do amazing things. Does He do them all the time? No. He will heal my friend here, either on this side of heaven or that. And that's His prerogative. I leave that up to Him. It's always the best choice to do that. But, we've been mutating and having copying errors for hundreds of generations. And when we talk about the human genome and how it's falling apart potentially over so many generations, Human Genome Project shows that, we're just not as sound a being as we were 200 generations ago because we're mutated. And we're passing about 100 mutations per generation on to the next generation. That's what the Human Genome Project shows.
2.5 sessions of creation. Coming up, we're going to tell you now more clearly what the world says and why, hopefully, we're going to put a big question mark in your mind about evolution and how you can maybe answer some questions when you're asked about evolution and things by your grandchildren, by your children, by others. Let's take about a 13, 14-minute break.
Let's go.
We'll ring the bell and we'll
thank you,
start up
guys.
on evolution when you get back.
Thanks for asking questions, too. I appreciate you.
awesome.
I told him what I needed, and he's like, well, I can't do that, but I am doing it. So I get kind of a preview of what he does first. The turtle video was one that we got.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I bought it. I loved it.
Oh, yeah.
Is everybody ready for the second half? I have a quick announcement I need to make, so if I can have your attention real quick. I'm an equal opportunity youth pastor, and we have to move that baby grand piano from there to there after we're done. So I need 5 or 6 ladies, if they would help. If I could just get some guys to help me move it, the more the merrier. We can just carry that sucker in here. It shouldn't take very long. We'll do it after the service, so I'll meet you back there. Just anybody that can help out, appreciate it.
You all came back for more. It's good. You ready to roll?
All
right, here we go.
Yeah, I really, can you guys hear me now? You guys hear me okay? Thanks, Roy. Appreciate you. Roy does a great job, too. You guys don't know these guys like Doug, who's back in a room somewhere, and Sarah that does cameras, and Roy. You guys have a staff here. It's phenomenal. They're just amazing people. Very capable. I never left from when you guys went and did whatever and came back. I'm still here. It was a lot of fun to talk to a lot of you guys. I'll step back just to this here. So what I want to really point out to you is when you start talking to people about evolution, and I was an evolutionist when I was growing up. I just thought this was how we got here, you know. I didn't have all the facts. I didn't know anything about human genetics or genetics in general or any of these wonderful things or molecular machines. We didn't know that stuff. You know, we thought Lucy was our grandmother, you know, the chimp, and you know, we thought all this stuff was true. We believed it. We were all trained in that. And that's how you got A's in class, is you memorized this stuff. And you thought that's where you came from. Well, that's cool. But you know what? It was a lie. And I'm going to show you tonight some of the things that really shook me after the fact, after becoming a believer. And I want you to understand how the scientific world arrives at these things, and the faith system that I came out of, which would be materialism or humanism. And the problem that we have is it's an information war. There are things that you guys would never known unless I show you right here, which is crazy. But did you know that the horseshoe crab, anybody ever seen a horseshoe crab, gone to the ocean, seen one of those things? Okay. You know, they're in the Cambrian layer of the geologic column with trilobites, one of my favorite little animals. Trilobites appear to be completely wiped out. But we find these guys in that lowest layer of the fossil record, and then we don't find them again. But yet we go to the beach and find them now. So there's something very wrong with this whole situation from a fossil perspective. And we'll really hit this hard when we get to the flood. But here we have some different animals that are called living fossils. But I want to ask you right now, do you think God used evolution to make you? Well, why not? Why don't you believe that? Because we're fearfully and wonderfully made, says Gary. That's true, man. That's really a good answer. These are all animals that are alive that look just like their fossil friends, in some cases 400 to 500 million years ago, and yet they look exactly the same. Okay, so the scientific method for guys that are non-science people, you have to understand this is the way they're coming at you. I see something. I ask some questions about what I see. These things give me some testable things that I can then create a hypothesis, a guess at what might be happening. And then I want to run tests to see if what I thought was going to happen happens. And then if it doesn't, I need to adjust my guess, my hypothesis, based on the evidence that I see and say, is it true or not? And if it's not, then I change the hypothesis. And then I do this again. This is basically the scientific method as it was taught to me many moons ago. However, if you look at any of these quote-unquote theories, which is beyond a hypothesis, to me, they never get out of this stage because they just don't make sense. But that's what you're dealing with. But you also have to understand when you work in the science realm, it's your job to question everything, right? Wait a minute, I'm not really sure about that. Let's test that out. No, That's why there's so many denominations. I'm convinced of this. So we look at Charles Darwin on the Beagle in 1835. And he says, you know what, I'm going out here to the Galapagos Islands. He first went down into South America, Argentina, Falkland Islands, made his way over here. 1835, man, times were hard back then. Here he is on the Beagle. He goes out and he has, I believe he has a preconceived idea of what he's looking for. He's looking for an excuse, perhaps, but we'll learn more later about that. And he sees these birds, finches, and he watches over a season and he sees these beaks of these finches changing. And he says, wait a minute, do you think that these beaks changing mean that eventually they turn into different kinds of birds? And if I really believe that, and I collect a bunch of sample finches, and I go back and I test to see if the different science disciplines could confirm this, paleontology, biology, fill in the ology, all of those, I'm going to make a testable prediction that over time, if these changes of the beaks in these animals, these birds, became something else, I should find some transitional fossils where the finch turned into maybe an eagle or something. I don't know what he was looking for, but this is what his testable hypothesis was, that these gentle changes over millions of years would become a different animal. Okay, that's where he started. And so his first tenet would be common descent. Okay, I believe that maybe, based on his drawings of his birds, how maybe we started off as a single-celled animal and made our way from goo to zoo to you. That's basically what his theories began as. Common descent just means, if I'm an evolutionist and I say, I believe in common descent, we all came from amoeba. Well, you can basically take them apart with genetics now because that's not even possible, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The next is something, well, I believe in survival of the fittest and natural selection. The short-term mutations that gave me, what Gary's question, gave me some advantages short-term as a salmon to live in Lake Michigan, that lead to my death when I leave and go back to the ocean because I lost a bunch of information. I can never go back to a wolf if I'm a Wheaten Terrier Poodle mix, a Woodle, I can't be a wolf again. I lost information genetically. The problem is that he believed that these beneficial mutations would eventually make a better animal, a stronger animal, maybe for the short term, but in the long term, they lost a lot of capability to get that way. We're going to learn that tonight. So when somebody says, do you believe in evolution? Say, oh, common descent? No. Natural selection? Well, I think you can get some benefits short-term out of mutations, but there's no way it leads to a better animal over time. In fact, mutations over time, we know, are almost always harmful. Oh, well, what about adaptation? Well, within a kind, at a species level, I'm sure there's adaptations, like the salmon that adapted to survive with less salt in the water, but unfortunately, generationally, they don't have the ability to be back in the salt anymore, and they die when they go there. Or polar bears that have to eat a high-protein diet, they can't go back and be brown bears again, and they can't survive on berries, their metabolism's too high. So they had a short-term gain to survive in cold weather climates, but now, it's warming up. They can't find the right food to eat, and they're going extinct. That's why there's so much of the animal kingdom is extinct. So we would say, okay, I'll buy on adaptation as long as you're talking about basically microevolution within a family, genus, or a kind of animal. I'll believe that. So you see, when somebody says, you believe in evolution, you have to understand Are you talking about common descent, natural selection, or adaptation? Now you've really got them on their heels because they probably haven't even thought like this. But we're not so much opposed to adaptation as long as you're talking about within basically a species or a kind of animal. What's a kind of animal? There'll be a quiz on this. You can have a male and female of an animal or a bird or a fish, whatever, and they have little babies. And these little babies can have babies too. That's usually a kind, almost always. That's what a kind is. So, you guys could go marry somebody on their other side of the planet, have children, because you're all the same kind. You're all humankind. Make sense? That's what a kind is. Same thing. Can you get an apple tree out of an acorn? Why? They're not the same kind, are they? Duh, this is not a tree of life. This is an orchard of life, and it's always been, and the genetics prove it. So don't let them, well, now there could be, And of course, then there's the aliens that always come in and save the day. But who made them? They're just kicking the can down the road. Okay, so here we have an elephant shrew. I'm going to go back here and pick on him. He was often thought of in the fossil record before they found him in South Africa as the ancestor to the elephant. Unfortunately, there's still elephant shrews running around. That's why they called him that. I told you about the horseshoe crab at the beginning. You see them on the beaches today. Problem is, they're in the fossil record, the lowest level of the geologic column in the Cambrian explosion, along with trilobites and other things, and barnacles, which you're going to learn about here in a minute. And yet they're still exactly the same. Wait a minute, there's nothing evolved. What about the nautilus or an ammonite down in the Philippine Sea? He looks exactly the same today as he did 450 million years ago in the fossil record. Something's wrong here. I guess he was just perfect, and he didn't need to change. Who's heard of this guy? Anybody know who he is? Coelacanth, the dino fish. He's found in the same fossil record as the Tyrannosaurus rex, but he's still swimming around in the Indian Ocean. We found colonies of them. In fact, back in 2013, they cataloged the national, the paleontology or paleobiology database. They quit keeping track of this, by the way. It's really funny. So in 2013, we had 3,241 living fossils that look exactly the same as 2.6 million years ago. This number grew, as far as I know, this number grew to almost 3 times that size and it quit being tracked. When you start counting plants and Carolina fern and other things, when you go to the flood if you're going to be here for the flood, which is in 2 weeks? 2 weeks, the flood, and you'll all get fossils that are here. I hand those out. We have a lot of fun with this. You're going to see a bunch of animals that look exactly the same as they did hundreds of millions of years ago that were found a mile above sea level. There's just all kinds of things blowing up in your mind right now. Wait a minute. And I mean, there's lots of them. And so living fossils are proof that things really haven't changed over millions of years. In fact, they're pretty much static. And the other thing would be in geology, if these predictions are right about evolution, and we have this geologic column and things get better and better and better and spiraling upward into, wonderful things. Well, the problem is when we do these boreholes and things, we find these catastrophic events in layers on all the continents. It wasn't just, in one little area it did this and all this other stuff. And there's a major problem with this belief system, especially when you get into the tectonic plates, the soft tissues being found in ancient animals like dinosaurs, the catastrophic evidence of an event that where fish are eating fish, giving birth, and all of these things. And you have to ask yourself, is this really millions or billions of years of evolution, or was there some kind of catastrophic event that buried these animals? The biggest problem you're going to have are these polystrate fossils like trees. Here's one in Arkansas. He must have lived about 300 million years. Look at the layers here. And he has no roots. That's because he got sheared off by a mudslide during a great event, a catastrophic event. You see, if you're a uniformitarianist like I was, you would think everything's just been going along, a little bit at a time, everything's getting better, we're evolving. No, what you see are shoaling animals buried here, and the ones that were in the shallow oceans killed first. It's just the order in which they died or they were buried because of density and whatnot. So this really kind of, you just have so many problems if you're an evolutionist, as I was, to even come up with answers for some of these silly things. So my hero was Stephen Gould, who was an evolutionist. He was there at Harvard, and he said, you know what? These evolutionary trees we've created, basically we have animals at the nodes, at the end points. We don't have anything in between. We're trying to find transitional fossils, but they're just not there. I actually have this fossil here. This is a trilobite. We'll talk about him during the flood presentation. He has a compound eye, has 10 unique features. It's one of the most elaborate, beautifully designed eyes in nature. The horseshoe crab has the same one, so they must be a relative of some kind. Both in the Cambrian layer. We don't find them today. But he has no ancestors below him, beside him, or above him. He has these beautiful compound eyes, super complex, and they show up all at once, fully formed, ready to go. In the lowest form of the Cambrian layer, which is the geologic column. So these kind of things bother you over time if you're an evolutionist, and eventually, the Lord seeks you and brings you to himself, and you go, oh, I see. There must have been some kind of an event that caused all this. So I'm going to give you some ideas, some things to think about, and you probably come up with better ideas than I did, but I'm going to give you some you never probably would have said, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll use barnacles as an example against evolution. Well, here's one. So I call these all or nothings. Here comes an animal or a plant, or here comes an animal that has all these wonderful features that are all online at the same time, just like you guys. Eyes, ears, all of these things you have. Yeah, wait till we get into this a little bit more. Your DNA, this structure. Everything has to be there all at the same time, and you can't evolve to this, or you never would have had the first one. And a barnacle is a good example. This little guy is a Cambrian fossil. He's down in the lowest layer. Anybody have a boat in here? There's a few. Barnacles a problem? Well, if you're in an area where the barnacles are, yes, they are a problem. That's right. Happiest, 2 days of a boat owner's life, the day you buy it and the day you sell it. I understand, unless it's a fishing boat, and then I understand keeping that. But here we have this barnacle. He's exactly the same today as the fossil record shows in the Cambrian. He has no relatives. He's unchanged. He's unbelievable. Somehow the little baby larva is born, and he knows where a great anchoring spot for him is going to be to live out his entire life. What gets even more, here's one right here. Let's make him move around for you. That's what they look like. There they are. And they have these two little nozzles. Guess what he has inside of him? An oily lipid primer and a phosphoprotein that, when mixed with this primer, creates an underwater epoxy bond 3/10,000th of an inch that supports over 7,000 pounds of pressure. And he's always been that way since the Cambrian level. Wait a minute now. He didn't evolve to this. He shows up doing this. Anybody want some of this two-part epoxy bond that works underwater that'll do this? I kind of like to have some of that. The gecko, his little pads and all that those guys at MIT and stuff are working on, the gecko skin so guys can climb glass and stuff. And it's like, anybody ever stop to think who designed this thing? It's kind of ridiculous, right? Now, wait a minute. Remember, he has no relatives. What about an egg? Who raises chickens? Yes. How many days does an egg take to hatch if you let it go to be a chick? What was that? 21? All right. 21 days? That's right. Not 22. Not 20, usually. They can start pecking at that time. But you go any more than that, little chickie is not going to survive. There's a lot of reasons why. He basically has a shell. If you ever thought about when you pull an egg out of the refrigerator, it's got 10,000 little holes, little pores in it. And they're structured just in such a way, amazingly, it must be over chance and time, over billions of years, millions of years, And they are the exact micrometers in diameter to allow, and the structure is such, like a filtering system, to allow for carbon dioxide to come out and other gases, about 4.5 liters over the 21-day mission, but yet take in 6 liters of oxygen. Another thing that these pores do is they keep water out and they let air in so that the little chickie can grow up. So you can go to Chick-fil-A and have a Chick-fil-A sandwich. My Aunt Pansy had a chicken farm up in Sheridan, Missouri, and I knew this, but had no idea what it really meant when I was about this tall. It took 21 days for chicks, about 3 weeks on the day. Well, it's no different than what you're going to see in a SpaceX, who asked the question about Elon Musk, right? So when he designs these missions, guess what? He builds this capsule for just the amount of oxygen and nutrients and proteins and water and a way to dispense of the carbon dioxide and other things that would kill whoever's in there. And they have a set time to survive. It'd be no different if he said, okay, we're going to build this thing and it's going to be for 21 days. And if you don't make it back, Apollo 13, right? You're gone, right? It's the same kind of thing. Now, wait a minute. Hold on. How does an egg do that? How could the first egg have ever produced a chick if it had to evolve to do that? It never would have happened. All these things have to be there. Because here we go. First you have the little embryo and his little heart starts beating. And then on day 3, the blood vessels go out. And here he's got his little knee and his elbow on the 5th day. And on the 7th day, he starts to grow a unique thing called an egg tooth. And that egg tooth allows for the chickie to peck his way from the inside out. That's what it's made for. If he doesn't have that, he can't get out. And guess how many days it takes for this to grow and be functional? About 14 days. Very first chickie had to have all these things lined up doing this thing. And he starts doing this, and he starts filling his egg, and he starts eating up all the food in there, the yolk and the proteins. And here he comes on the 20th day. He knows, because there's no more room left in there for him. There's no more air for him. There's not enough. He's in the SpaceX mission. He's going to die. But no, he not only has the tooth, he knows what to do. Now, come on. Is that awesome? All right, so he starts pecking his way out, and on the 21st day, Chick-fil-A. There he is. What about your ear? Think about all these parallel systems have to come along all at the same time so you can hear something. Get ready. You thought DNA was cool. Now let's look at a system like your ear.
Does our hearing system provide evidence that the Bible's account of human origins is true? That humans were created instantly by God in his own image? Let's take a look at the evidence to find out. Our sophisticated hearing system is made up of 5 separate components that don't make any sense by themselves, but when combined together, they make a complete system that allows us to hear. It all starts with the outer ear, which is specially shaped to capture sound waves so they can travel through the ear canal. These sound waves press against our eardrums and wiggle 3 tiny bones, called the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, that amplify the signal by a factor of 1.7 times using leverage. This mechanical process converts to a hydraulic process by pressing against the cochlea, which again amplifies the signal, this time by a factor of 22 times. The fluid inside the cochlea moves over 20,000 microscopic hair cells that are connected by tiny molecular linking springs, causing an electromechanical transduction process that transforms the sound vibration into a neural signal that is immediately comprehended as speech. Just how did evolution dream all of this up? These 5 separate systems, each of which is purposeless and meaningless without the others, all connecting to make an overall hearing system that truly shows intentional design. Without the cranial hearing nerve, what good are thousands of multi-length hair cells that interpret various sound frequencies? If the hair cells were not bathed in a solution with the perfect ratio of potassium and calcium, how could they transfer the sound signal? What purpose would the cochlea serve without the 3 tiny ear bones that amplify the signal just enough for the whole thing to work? And did you know there's even a tiny tendon between the hammer and anvil that shifts the stirrup backward to protect the ear when sounds are too loud? How did chance evolution think that one up? Our hearing system is even self-lubricated with drainage tubes. And to think, this entire system runs on energy from what we ate for breakfast. Our hearing system has been carefully engineered to take invisible sound waves through a complex system that turns them into electrical signals that are heard as sound and immediately comprehended as speech. What's amazing is that we even do this in stereo. Having ears on both sides of our head enables us to determine the direction and distance of sounds almost immediately. Our brain even tracks how long it takes for sound to travel from one ear to the other to determine speed. How amazing is that? Our hearing system even does all of this while keeping our balance along the pitch, roll, and yaw axis. Realistically speaking, how could something like this evolve? Doesn't the design explanation make more sense? How could such an interconnected, interdependent, complex hearing system arise by mere chance with no intentional design? Even the starting systems in cars, which also have 5 components, are obviously put together by a designer to serve an overall purpose that is only evident when they are all put together in a certain way. Indeed, the 5 components of our hearing system were put together at the same time when we were made as complete, functioning humans who are well equipped for taking dominion over this planet God gave us. Some random hodgepodge of matter plus energy and time has never produced something with such function, purpose, and cohesiveness, with all of the independent parts requiring the other to make anything of use or value. Truly, we are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Can you hear me now? Okay, all right. Now, wait a minute. You've got just the right mix of calcium and potassium and all these different things, just to make the perfect solution for electrical pulses to make their way through special fibers who are connected to nerves that go to your head and say, it's over there, that's Steve. I can hear his voice and I recognize it. All of those things have to come online at the same time, just like the chicken, just like the barnacle. But wait a minute. What about these guys? Well, we had Piltdown Man. I actually remember, well, I've seen them all, actually. I remember from my education. They still teach Piltdown Man. Have you seen him? It's a good thing that guy went to jail in '53 because it was a fake. It was a human jawbone that he treated with acids, you know. How about Nebraska Man? They still teach that? They still teach it in school? Nebraska Man in biology or anything? No, paleontology. You know, that's kind of sad because that ended up, that pig's tooth sure really created a cool looking guy up there in Nebraska. Because once DNA got involved, we realized these teeth were from a pig in 1980. Neanderthal, he's real interesting, right? Well, cavemen, you know, the Geico guy and everything. No, during the Ice Age, which we'll talk about, these Ice Age guys, you know, pretty smart. They got trapped in Europe. They huddled together. Genetically, a lot of Punnett squares line up. They get short, stocky, strong people, women, you know, they lived in caves to survive. They're really intelligent, very strong people. Their genetics are purely human. In fact, the same genetics that are in the Neanderthal Valley peoples that lived in caves, discovered by a bishop, as I understand, really are in the human population today. We can find those same genetic traits in the human population. They're just humans. We just kind of draw them up like this, you know, and we make fun of them and have the Geico caveman, but actually they're really strong humans that were intelligent and highly adaptive and survived the Ice Age in Europe. They appear to have migrated off into Africa and to Eastern Europe, and so the genetics of this people group ended up there. They're just humans. They just lived in caves. That's not really all that big a deal. This was my favorite. I had this National Geographic. Do you guys remember that one? Any of you guys are my age? Okay. Oh, I just thought that was it. We finally found the missing link. There she is, right? We didn't know that her bones were found over dispersed over miles of of territory and all put together. In fact, the pelvis was actually manipulated in some way to make her look like she could walk straight up. Yes, chimps can walk for uncomfortably upright for a little while, but then they got to get back down. She was a knuckle walker. She had the attributes of chimps we have today, maybe a little different variety or species of chimp, probably extinct now. But she weighed about 40 pounds and fell out of a tree and died. And we learned that in 2010, that her hips and her pelvis were really manipulated. She did not walk like this. She didn't have white around her eyes. She didn't have hands and feet. None of that. But we were told that, and so we believed that. So she was an ape, he was a human, this one was a pig, and this one was a fake. So there you go. So here we have Australopithecines, which are Lucy. Well, they're probably extinct chimps. Again, maybe 40, 50 pounds. She fell out of a tree, we think, to die. Neanderthals, we know they're fully human. We see recent genetic evidence. Genetics teaches us that the evidence we found in those remnants of that people group, we find them in the population today. They're humans. Sorry, there aren't really such a... Well, there were guys that lived in caves with their wives and children, and they survived an ice age. They were really strong people. If you have some Neanderthal genetics in you, you're probably a pretty strong person, you know, pretty tough person. Same thing with Heidelbergensis. So any guys ever been to Germany or were stationed there, like I was for a period of time, and around Heidelberg they found one of these guys. He's a lot like this guy. In fact, he's just another fully human that we find some of these genetics today in our population. Well, here's my favorite. So habilis is one of these, we called it the grab bag. I think it's down here, yes. So even as recent as maybe 30 years ago, habilis was kind of like, well, we have these remnants of monkey bone. We got some little parts we think might be human. We're not sure, so we put them together, and it's usually a combination of extinct apes and fully human peoples, and we consider those some kind of hybrid, maybe transitional human-ape thing. But if you look closely and you study this stuff, you find it's either a human or it's an extinct ape, but there are no transitions. They don't exist. There's never been a great example. Even the hobbits, the little people they found down in Indonesia, they're just people that had a really bad iodine deficiency, and they just didn't get that big. They were just little people, like pygmies, which, right, you know, we've seen these before. Yes, sir.
Lucy was in the news last week.
Oh, boy, she's still around? Okay.
Yeah, she has a pelvic bone structure which would have made it hard for her to have natural childbirth. So they're thinking that she must have had a midwife.
Either that or her pelvis was manipulated by a Dremel tool. And that's what we think probably happened. That's pretty awesome. I love that. You know, I mean, keep the illusion alive, man. I mean, if that's all your hope is, hey, they got a lot more faith than we got. Let me just say that. I know because I was there. But how about this? Have you guys heard you're 98% like a chimp? No, you're 98% chimp. Did you know that study when they looked at it and they realized how it was done and how they manipulated the DNA study? They found that 18% of the chimp DNA was completely ignored and 25% of the human. They just basically cropped it to make it 98. Why? Because in evolution, you need at least 98% the same genetics to make an argument that it's from the same group, the same family. So hey, we got to get to 98 somehow so we can keep this chimp thing going. So here's what we're going to do. And literally, this is what the study shows. And this is actually a secular source that said, no, they got rid of 2.4 billion letters on both sides of this deal to find the common 1.3 billion letters in the DNA. No, don't believe that. Challenge it. Not true. Okay, so we had Haeckel, who was a peer of our friend Mr. Darwin. And he said, you know, this is the tree of life. This is how we got here. We came from amoebas by way of amphibians and by lemurs. That's why lemurs were so important to us evolutionary people. They kind of look like a raccoon monkey thing. And it's like, yeah, there's a transitional species for us. So we love lemurs. And somehow that became us over literally millions of years. But if you look at genetics, not the Bible, at genetics, you're going to see, yeah, we're all the same kind. These guys are 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 all the same kind. And I don't have any wolf elephants or Ella wolves or Pingua horses. I don't have any of those. Well, what happened? I thought this is how it was. Well, you were in that world we were talking about a minute ago of common descent from the amoeba or somehow natural selection, mutations becoming different animals over time. That's what you believe. You would never believe in an orchard of life what genetics proves there is. That's what we've learned in the last, really even the last 5 to 10 years. It's become obvious. Watch this little video with me about genetics.
Actually, I believe genetics is the most powerful argument against evolution. And the reason is that when you look at the genes of things, I mean, they're transmitted and passed on generation to generation. But the changes you see, the mutations, actually destroy the genes.
What biology does is actually it studies the genetics, the genetic information, the transfer of genetic information, the control of genetic information, or in my field, biotechnology, how to change that intelligently to create something novel. Darwinism has nothing to do there. The random approach produces nothing. Randomness cannot compete with intelligence in understanding nature.
I organized a symposium at Cornell University, and the topic was biological information. And all of the scientists agreed on one thing, and that is that information is fundamental to our understanding of what life is. Information is, in a sense, what makes life life. And I'm not just talking about information like data. I'm talking about information networks, communication networks within the cell.
One of the most amazing information transfer systems in the cell involves the way proteins are encoded in and decoded from strands of DNA. Starting out with these long, fragile, sticky strings of DNA, an amazing machine called an RNA polymerase zips down the strand, opens up the coils, and copies the DNA into another molecule called RNA. Now, RNA uses a slightly different language convention. It still has 4 letters like DNA, but instead of A, C, G, and T, it has A, C, G, and U. The RNA then leaves the nucleus and another amazing machine attaches to it. It's called a ribosome, and it is in charge of translating from the language of the RNA with its 4 letter bases to the language of proteins with their 20 different amino acids. 3 bases on the bottom of the tRNA match to 3 letter groups in the RNA. On the other end are amino acids which pop off as they're attached to the growing protein strand. But the process isn't finished because most proteins need help folding properly. And that's facilitated by little molecules called chaperones. They attach to and protect the unfolded protein as it's transported to a watermelon-shaped molecule called a chaperonin, which folds the protein into its final form. From DNA to protein is an incredibly complex process that uses precise and complex machines to translate between 2 completely unrelated languages, the linear code of the DNA world to the 3-dimensional code of the protein world.
If we look into these complexities and into these codes in the genome and in the working together, the operating system in the cells, then it is very hard to exclude that there hasn't been intelligence behind it. And I think that is what the creationists recognize in these systems.
How did this incredible communication network that's even present in the simplest cell, how did it arise? Well, you need 3 things for it to arise. Number 1, you need a language. You can't even conceive of a communication system until there's a language, because there's senders and receivers in the cell. Secondly, you need communication channels or networks. It's a little bit like the hardware that enables the internet. And thirdly, you have to have meaningful information that is being translated into language and communicated through the channels of communication.
Information is at the heart of cellular function. Did you know the cell even has a post office? They're these specialized molecules called kinesins, and they're in charge of delivering packets of material to different parts of the cell. But in their journey, they go to pre-specified destinations. Without that addressing system, the cell couldn't even work.
Information, communication, and language. They're non-material entities. They arise through intelligence, and they're mutually defining. So you can't have one without the other. They all have to arise at the same time.
It just keeps getting better, doesn't it? It just keeps getting better. Well, we know from studying, we have the common descent problem, which is, again, good as zoo to you kind of thing. But we have the atomic microscope from the question in the back that tells us that we can see right into these amoeba and actually analyze their genetics. And you know what we found when we sequenced the genetics of amoeba? Guess what they've always been? Exactly. How about lemurs? They're our transitional guy. No, that was one of the first ones we sequenced. No, they're all lemurs, always been lemurs, and always will be, I guess. Some variation, some adaptation within kind, but they're all lemurs. They didn't come from monkeys or anything else. In fact, you're like 99.9% the same as every other human in the face of the earth. So basically, you're all the same kind too. So you younger guys, you can go to the other side of the world, find some girl, marry her, have kids, and they can have kids because you're all the same kind. Isn't that cool? That's exactly what we just read about in Genesis 1. Isn't that kind of funny? Okay, so what we see in the Bible is these kinds that become diverse species in reverse order. If we look at all kings play chess on fine green sand, which we'll look at here in just a moment for you biology people and stuff. Okay, so natural selection, yeah, we get some beneficial mutations over a short run, but we die. These animals die over time. They become extinct. And by the way, if Dave has a mutation that's favorable, how does it get over to somebody living in South Africa? You know, there's always that problem too of propagating a positive mutation among a population unless you're all local. So natural selection doesn't seem to answer any of these questions for us. You have all these problems of irreducible complexity at the molecular and submolecular levels to deal with. None of that can be handled by some kind of slow mutated process. And you see these fully formed complex species like eggs and barnacles and right? And you know what? We have these genetics that invalidate the logic behind a common ancestor as well. So that kind of blows up the common descent and the natural selection all at once. And then we have a bunch of unguided processes that can't arise out of non-material processes, or they are non-material things. So, you know, we've got our favorite little guy, the bacterial flagellum. So we have the, you know, this little motor that's at the molecular, submolecular level. It's how a little bacteria gets around. Acid-powered, liquid-cooled, rotary motor going 100,000 RPM, and can reverse its rotation in a quarter turn. Wait a minute, hold on. And it's got a clutch and U-joints, and it has no relatives. It has no, these components did not come together over millions of years, or there would never have been an original bacteria that propelled itself this way. You see, it has to be this way. It has to have the clutch, the U-joint, the motor, everything. How many of you guys can get your car up to 100,000 RPM and in a quarter turn go 100,000 RPM the other direction? Okay, now hold on. You guys go driving down I-70 tonight trying to get home. You go about 110 miles an hour and throw it in reverse. What's going to happen? This little guy does it for a living. In fact, the cell senses the sugars that it's going to feed on, and it tumbles along. And when it senses sugars, it doesn't have a brain, it detects these sugars it needs for its power, for its life, for its livelihood, and it turns on its propeller and goes toward it. And it consumes the sugars, absorbs that, and then tumbles again until it finds something, and then the little motor turns on again. It goes, wait, I'm going the wrong way. He turns it around this way, and he goes, do you think that happened by chance? How in the world did the first bacteria feed itself? Where did the sugar come from for him? It was all there too. Bats, I know they're, we see them, we don't realize what they can do, but they show up in the fossil record fully formed. These guys can catch 1,000 mosquitoes an hour. Wait a minute, how did they do that in the dark? Echolocation. And they have no transitional species to bats. They show up fully formed doing this. Build me a robot that will go out and catch 1,000 mosquitoes an hour. How many engineers would it take? You ever think about this for a minute? How about bombardier beetles? These little guys can emit 200 degrees of heat by mixing two chemicals together that create an explosion, right? Some hydrogen peroxide is one thing, and then another chemical mix here. It's down here for you guys that are into this. But what would have happened if our little bombardier beetle friend had just shown up and had the wrong two chemicals? He'd have just blown up, and that would have been it. No evolution. But he's got this. Somehow, he's got just what he needs to do this. Explain that to me. Elephants, we've talked about them before, but they have nerves in their feet. They can hear in their ears, and they can know where their family is, and they can feel vibrations. They can hear sounds. They can remember things. They're amazing animals, and they show up in the fossil record just like that. They didn't come from an elephant shrew because they're still around. Another video.
Just as English letters convey a particular message depending on their arrangement, the sequences of chemical bases along the spine of the DNA molecule convey precise instructions for building proteins. The arrangement of these bases directs the arrangement of the 20 different kinds of amino acids that make up protein molecules. Proteins, in turn, perform a vast array of critical jobs inside cells, catalyzing reactions, processing genetic information, and forming the structural parts of molecular machines and other biological structures. Building new animals requires many new protein molecules, and building new proteins requires new biological information.
I used to ask my students a question when I was teaching. If you want to give your computer a new function, what do you have to give it? And they would know. They would say code or software or instructions, a program. All those are the correct answer. To generate a new function in a computer, you have to have code, you have to have instructions. The same thing turns out to be true in biology. This is the great discovery of the second half of 20th century biology, that information is running the show in biological systems. To build a new form of animal life requires cell types, requires proteins, and therefore requires genetic information. And that's the big question that the Cambrian explosion presents. If you want to think about how to build an animal, how would these animals get built, you have to have some explanation for the informational requirements of their construction.
According to modern evolutionary theory, new proteins and new forms of animal life arise through random genetic mutations, sifted by natural selection. But in an alphabetic text or a section of computer code, random changes typically degrade meaning or functionality and ultimately generate gibberish.
As we've come to appreciate the digital or typographic character of genetic information, we also, it raises some really interesting questions about the efficacy of that mutation-driven mechanism. And we know from computer code, for example, that if you start making random changes to a section of computer code, you're much more likely to degrade the information that's there already than you are to come up with a new operating system or program.
This problem has long been recognized by computer scientists, mathematicians, and engineers, including a group from MIT who convened a now famous conference at the Wistar Institute in Philadelphia in 1966. These scientists met to consider whether the random mutation natural selection mechanism could conceivably generate enough biological information to build a new animal or even a new protein in the time available to the evolutionary process. One of these scientists was MIT engineering professor Murray Eden.
No currently existing formal language can tolerate random changes in the symbol sequences which express its sentences. Meaning is almost invariably destroyed. Murray Eden, MIT.
Eden knew that random changes to alphabetic or digital characters inevitably degrade the information in any section of alphabetic text or digital code, and for a very good reason.
Whether you're talking about digital code in a software program or a section of text in an English sentence or book, or the genetic text in DNA, there are vastly more ways to arrange the relevant characters that convey the information in a way that will produce gibberish than there are that will produce function or meaning.
Eden and his colleagues suspected that the genetic code faced a similar difficulty. When it came to producing new genetic information, at least enough to generate a new protein, the random mutation natural selection mechanism had to deal with what mathematicians call a combinatorial problem. In mathematics, the term combinatorial refers to the number of possible ways that a set of objects can be arranged or combined. In genetics, the combinatorial problem poses a severe challenge to the random mutation natural selection mechanism. To understand why, imagine a thief who would like to steal a beautiful new bike. All that stands between the thief and the bike is a lock with 4 dials, each marked with the numbers 0 to 9. But there is only one correct combination that will set the bike free.
The reason a bike lock works is that there are vastly more ways of arranging those numeric characters that will keep the lock closed than there are that will open the lock.
A thief without knowledge of the combination must guess the right combination from among 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 possibilities. That's 10,000 possible combinations, which usually would be more than enough to defeat a random search for the one right combination. Yet there is still a way the thief might succeed. If he has enough time to try enough combinations, he might eventually identify the right one by chance. For example, if trying each combination takes 10 seconds, then in 15 hours an especially diligent thief could try more than 5,000 combinations, or more than half of the total possible combinations. In that case, he would be more likely to succeed than to fail in opening the lock. But now imagine a much more complicated lock. Instead of 4 dials, this lock has 10 dials. Instead of 10,000 possible combinations, this lock has 10 to the 10th power, or 10 billion possible combinations. With only one combination that will open the lock out of 10 billion, it's much more likely that the thief will fail, even if he devotes his entire life to the task. So what about relying on random mutations to search for a new DNA sequence capable of directing the construction of a new functional protein? Would such a random search for new genetic information be more likely to succeed or fail in the time available to the evolutionary process? In other words, is a random mutational search for a new gene or protein more like the search for the combination on the 4-dial lock or the 10-dial lock? The scientists at the Wistar conference were unable to definitively answer that question because at the time, no one could adequately quantify how hard the search problem was.
So in the late 1960s, one could make these arguments based upon analogy to things we understood, written language, computer code, but we didn't have any experimental data to show whether those analogies actually suited the biological case. So no one could come up with the exact numbers to answer these questions back then.
Molecular biologists at the time did know that the number of possible combinations corresponding to any given sequence of DNA is extremely large and grows exponentially with the length of the molecule in question. For example, corresponding to one short protein 150 amino acids long, there are 10 to the 195th power other amino acid arrangements of that length. That's an unimaginably large number. But scientists in the 1960s didn't know how many of those arrangements were actually functional. They didn't know, in effect, how many combinations would open the lock. That didn't stop evolutionary biologists from speculating. Many argued that there must be a high proportion of functional sequences among all possible sequences, so that a random search for a new functional sequence would have a high probability of success.
The way they did that is to say, well, maybe biological sequences are not nearly as finicky, not nearly as picky about which characters are where as written language is or as computer code is. And so that's the track that they took. That maybe proteins don't really care which amino acid is where, and there's a great deal of variability, and therefore you can have the same function performed by a huge number of protein chains and a huge number of genes.
But recent experiments in molecular biology and protein science have replaced speculation with data. These experiments have established that DNA-based sequences capable of making functional proteins are in fact extremely rare among the vast number of possible sequences. Just how rare? After working at Cambridge University, molecular biologist Douglas Axe set out to answer that question, using a technique called site-directed mutagenesis. His experiments enabled him to estimate that for every DNA sequence that generates a functional protein of just 150 amino acids in length, there are 10 to the 77th amino acid arrangements that will not fold into a stable three-dimensional protein structure capable of performing that biological function. One correct sequence for every 10 to the 77th power incorrect sequences. That's equivalent to searching for just one combination on a lock with 10 digits on each of 77 dials. To put this in perspective, keep in mind that there are only 10 to the 65th atoms in the entire Milky Way galaxy. Could random genetic mutations effectively search a space of possibilities that large in order to find even a single functional protein sequence?
So given that you have this very daunting probability, 1 in 10 to the 77th power, how could something that improbable happen? Well, as we know generally with improbable things, the way that they can happen is by having lots and lots of opportunities for them to happen. So for life, those opportunities take the form of individual living organisms in which a mutation could occur that could conceivably provide the solution. No matter how rare it is, if you get enough of these opportunities, it can become probable. So the question is, if the number is 1 in 10 to the 77th power, if that's the improbability that must be overcome, would the number of organisms that have existed on the planet since the beginning of life come close to matching that number? And it turns out that it doesn't come anywhere close.
Wait a minute. So are you telling me that there's not even a mathematical possibility in natural selection producing even a decent protein out of this deal? That's exactly right. So we know now natural selection does not give us an opportunity to improve fast enough to overcome other problems we would encounter. So, we had the Miller experience. We grew up with this. This guy zapped methane, ammonia, and hydrogen and somehow got some useful information and said, yeah, we could kind of create life through that. What's the biggest problem with his experiment? Where's this atmosphere at? That doesn't exist here. Okay. These elements in the primordial soup that he used to come up with his experiments, to come up with at least one valid piece of information. It turns out it doesn't exist. We know mutations cause a loss of information. Long-term capabilities of the species are greatly impacted. Short-term might be good for those salmon. We're going to talk about them in just a second. There they are. There's your salmon. It worked okay for a little while until they tried to go back to the salt water, and then that was it. You don't really have a good way to distribute these traits across the globe to other populations and improvements. This one really bothered Charles Darwin as well. Gratuitous beauty. Gratuitous beauty over here. Is a big problem. Hey, coyotes, come eat me. There's no real natural selection advantage to looking like a peacock and running around on the prairie. Here we have these bears, right? And we had the brown bears, like we talked. They became polar bears, but they can never get home. They've lost all this information. But we know they all came from the same kind. But now we see these animals going extinct. Here's the latest one. They tried this one on my generation. I know where whales came from or bears came from. They're related. I don't really believe me. This is being taught in some schools right now, that these whales were really just bears or vice versa that came to land and became one or the other. The problem with that is There's so many systems that have to be traded out to get a whale out of a bear or vice versa. I mean, they've just gotten so smart, they're stupid. This is not possible. And it's not right genetically. Bears have always been bears. That's what they look like. There's the genetic tree of the bears. Guess what they've always been? Exactly. Okay, so we know amoebas have always been that. We know that there's not even a mathematical possibility you can get enough improvements through mutations to even get something useful over a long period of time. But we do see some adaptation among these animals. The short-term gain, long-term extinction, and we see lots of that in nature, unfortunately. And I think Mr. Darwin was actually just seeing finches over a season, eating harder grain, adapting, and or over time. But they're all still, these finches had different beaks and adapted over time, but guess what they always were and still are? They're finches. So look at all these wonderful dogs. Any of you guys that have dogs at home, you probably have some mix of those. But can any of these dogs in the world go to the other side of the world and find a husband or a wife and have puppies? Why? Because they're all the same kind. That's right. Let's go. You're getting it. Okay, so we would agree with adaptation as long as you're talking about in the same kind. Well, what's a kind again? Let's get real specific. You guys already know this. Male and a female, they have babies, and those babies are fertile too. And they produce the same kind. Acorns become oak trees. They don't become apple trees. You know, it works in plants too. Kings play chess on fine green sand. That's your acronym. We came up with this. God says, genetically, we've learned this, from the family on down, primarily genus and species, but from the family on down, you have kinds that can intermix. You know how many types of bobcats there are in the world? I mean, there's all kinds of different bobcats, but they're all bobcats. They came from the same kind, though, of Felidae, or cats, right? And you even have tigers and lions mating and having ligers, just like Napoleon Dynamite, for those that remember that movie. That's true. They actually do. So we don't see a tree of life. We see an orchard of life by kind. And it's validated by genetics and paleontology, everything. And now even the really deep genetic codes and things we're seeing. But you know, I think Neil had this right. It's a step for a man, a small step for man. It's a giant leap for mankind. When was the last time you heard that word? It's been erased from the culture, man. You know what? You're mankind. And womankind, but you know, you're humankind. Sorry, you're all the same kind. This race thing is a whole different ballgame. I'll tell you where that came from in just a second. So, do finch beaks change? Yeah. Did they evolve into some other new animal over time? Wait. Does science confirm that through paleontology, genetics, biology, any science you want to use as a discipline, do they confirm that these things are turning into new forms of life? No. You know, are there any transitional forms in the fossil record for the finches? No, still finches. You know, it's not even a good hypothesis. It's kind of embarrassing that we all believe that, you know, we're taught the theory of evolution. It's not even a good theory. It's not even a good hypothesis now that we have information, but that's not going to change. Because there's a worldview that goes behind this. I'm going to show you in just a second. If we saw that these things don't match, if we followed the scientific method, we should have gone back and changed the hypothesis. But really, they're just playing the same old record that I used to dance to, okay? Evolution, materialism, you know, atheist. We don't want God, don't want an accountability. So we don't want that. So this is really, if you look at evolution from a scientific method, it's gone. I mean, not common descent, not natural selection, adaptation, perhaps, as long as you're sticking to a kind. So why did evolution get so popular? We know nobody wants God in their life. We all understand that in this room. By the way, the people that come to these are always the people that pay attention in Sunday school, or you would not be here at this time of night, doing this. So I commend you for that. But you know what? He had a presupposition about God. In fact, he said, it's going to be difficult for these kids, if they're taught about God, to throw off this belief system. In fact, it's just as difficult for a monkey to throw off his instincts of fear and hatred of a snake as it will be for a kid to get rid of God once they believe it. And so he says, you know what? I just think that we may never know how we got here, so I'm just going to be happy to be an agnostic. This is who the guy is behind this thing. Wait, there's more. So, the origin of species. Well, this is like one of the most famous books. You know what? To buy a first edition, a copy of this, it's like $10,000. These guys collect these things. But notice the key phrase. Where did racism come from? Evolution, by means of natural selection, which is scientifically impossible, that you could get these complex organisms through mutations, is about the preservation of favored races in the struggle for survival. Oh, wait a minute. This book was actually used in framing up the Constitution for the Confederate States related to defending slavery, but even more so, which is fascinating, in 1871 in Descent of Man, this is what he writes in a follow-up book. You know what? These dang Australians, Mongolians, Africans, Indians, South Africans, I actually am like 18% North African, so I'm probably in this list here. Eskimos, non-white Europeans, these highest races. These higher races are above these savages. These savage races have low morality, insufficient powers of reasoning, weak power of self-command. This is where racism came from. And it leads to all kinds of stupid things. Like, look at Hitler here. He's going to exterminate 6 million people, Jews, 4 million other peoples, because he believed they were inferior races and he had evolved over them, so I'm just going to take their stuff. And them. That's what is behind the evolutionary mindset. If you are a believer in evolution, you really didn't know what you wandered into tonight, you have to question the morality of that as well. It's absolutely immoral to think that you're any better than anybody else. In fact, in the Bible, since I have an audience that's biblical here, you're not supposed to consider yourself any better than the next guy. In fact, less than. So get over it. One race, we're going to watch this little video. 8:15. We're right near the end here, so this is
the biblical view on race. While the Bible's take on race has remained constant since it was written, many have run astray with false interpretations, and some of these were driven by impure motives. But a plain reading through Scripture reveals there were two humans created at the beginning in the image of God and not in the image of apes. Indeed, Adam was not one of the animals. Rather, God had him name the animals and then take dominion over them. Adam and Eve's DNA was perfect. Their genome included all the necessary programming for the variability that we see today in various people groups. Some of the differences we observe with people today are also due to mutations that began compounding after the fall. The genealogies in Genesis provide a clear map to Adam about 6,000 years ago. Interestingly, secular research on mitochondrial DNA mutation rates actually confirms this biblical timeline, demonstrating that we all come from a single woman who lived only about 6,000 years ago. This mutation rate is even used by the FBI in forensic investigations. Then, just 10 generations after Adam and Eve, the entire human genome was bottlenecked to just 8 people who survived the year-long flood. This genetic bottleneck is at least partially responsible for the shortened lifespans of those who lived after the flood. The post-flood population increased quickly and was later dispersed as over 70 language groups spread around the globe after God confused their languages at Babel. Genesis 10:32 records, "These were the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations, in their nations, and from these nations were divided on the earth after the flood. Recent scientific studies even confirm there was explosive human population growth and DNA variability that occurred about the same time period. The New Testament also confirms God's plan to spread the nations over the earth, and he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. Are there differences between people groups today? Of course. The variety we see in people today, which exists both within and between people groups, is because of the pre-engineered adaptability that God established within the language of our DNA. Some of the differences we see are also due to mutations, or DNA copying mistakes, but the traits we typically use to categorize race groups are superficial, such as differences in skin, hair, and eye color. These traits account for less than 0.012% of human genetic differences, or one gene out of 12,000.
All the same, okay? You're the same race, you're the same kind. So this race thing has actually been something kind of perpetrated on us. Now, the Tower of Babel explains a lot. You speak a language, I speak a language, and that guy's different than me, so I hate on him. And first time I saw this was in the 80s, and I went to Ireland, and I saw a bunch of white guys with red hair attacking each other. And I thought, what in the world is this all about? And it's like, well, they're different than we are because they want this and we want that. And it's like, my gosh, the fall of man has brought us to the point where, people are just looking for, if you're a middle schooler or early high schooler, or you remember that time when you were there, the way up the ladder was to either pick on somebody else or put yourself over them or tell something bad about the other guy. And it appears like, this whole thing is it is a demonic thing. This evolution falsehood is really being perpetrated to do what he did in the garden. Deceive, divide, destroy. Deceive people into thinking something. Divide them up. You might have red hair like me, but I'm a Catholic, you're a Protestant. That's it, we're done. And so divide them up with the intent to destroy what they have. And I'm convinced evolution is basically a really wonderful tool that he has used and has kids and everybody else believing. And when it has absolutely no science behind it, you can't run it through the scientific method and even get a decent hypothesis. Agreed? Are you ready to defend yourselves? Come on, you got truth on your side. Even Darwin's going to say, hey, I feel pretty stupid today, writes his little buddy here, Charles Lyell. I feel like I've just lived to make mistakes. He's starting to realize there's a problem. In fact, he says, if this is really true about these natural selection things, where's all these transitional species in the fossil record? He's panicking. And you saw the quote earlier from day 6 where he says, you can't explain this eye by slow gradations of changes over time. These guys are out there trying to do it today to defend evolution. It's absolutely silly. You cannot defend that. You had to have had a created eye. By the way, the eye has all these receptors that plug into your brain and they all match up. So those two had to come online at the same time. And how awesome is your brain? It's amazing. It weighs 4 pounds and it does something it would take hundreds of pounds or thousands of pounds of iPhones to do. Crazy. Is it true? What does the evidence say? What does it say? What do you think the evidence, when you analyze it objectively, what does it say? If you take it from a scientific perspective, is there any weight to it at all? Is it even possible? Don't be afraid of this stuff. It's your friend. Truth is your friend in this situation. I love what Helen Keller said. You know what's worse than being blind? Having eyes and not seeing the hand of God. Wake up, folks. It's all on God's side of the fence. It's all on your side, and you really don't have to be afraid. Evolution. You want to talk about distant starlight and synchronicity of clocks and things like that. That's probably, something you want to talk about, physics and stuff like that. We've only been able to measure the speed of light in forward and backward direction. We've never been able to measure it in one direction. We don't know how fast it goes in one direction compared to the other, so we don't even really know how fast it goes because we can't synchronize the clocks to do it because we can't be at the other end to catch it. We have to bounce it off a mirror and get it back. I mean, there's all kinds of problems that are easily answered scientifically that are on your side biblically as well. So don't be afraid of this stuff. Steve, you're up. It's 8:14. We're 1 minute early. We're supposed to be done at 1:15. All right. Those guys are awesome. I was back there talking to them earlier.
The whole evolution doesn't really even follow the scientific method because they're locked in to what they believe and they can't change it even if they want to, is what I kind of picked up today.
It's true. And I mean, when I was an evolutionist, I didn't want anything else. I wanted to be able to call it's all about making yourself God in these situations, no accountability. Who wants that, especially when you're younger? You know, you just want to do what you want to do. I get that, I live that, I understand that, but it's not true. It's a lie. Yes?
I was just wondering, like, with the horse, when they're with, like, a donkey and it makes, like, a mule, that wouldn't be something that could procreate, correct? So what would be a term that's not something part of, like, a kind? Would there be another term for those animals that can't reproduce?
Yeah, I mean, you mean like where we get in and monkey around and we create a mule and they're sterile?
Yeah.
Because they're not from the same kind. I mean, in some cases, they can have enough genetics to carry on kind of like in some way more of a horse than a donkey.
But would they have a term?
Would they have a what? I'm sorry.
Would they have their own term as something that's not like continuing a genetic?
Yeah, they would end because their children are going to be sterile. So even if you have some, it's not going to last very long, and they're not going to propagate.
Okay, so they don't have another new.
Is there a name for a mutation? Yeah, you could call those mutations. By the way, do you drink milk? Do you like milk? Not really. Can you drink it? Who in here is lactose intolerant and is an adult? You're actually non-mutated. The rest of you guys are mutated because one of the things we learned from the human, there's some really cool things. How many of you guys have blue eyes? Raise your hands. You're mutants. That's not natural, that's a mutation. Lactose intolerance actually is genetically programmed in you to kind of trigger off when you reach maturity, you know, so that you don't need mother's milk anymore. And so those that can tolerate milk, that trigger is mutated and it's just turned off for you. And you can still drink milk. I don't like milk, so it doesn't bother me at all. Yes. I like chocolate milk, though. Yes, go ahead. Okay, go ahead. She's got one, too, here. Okay, we'll let her go.
In the Global Flood book that you assigned us to read, on the page it talks about the Earth's magnetic field.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Is that accepted by the scientific world now, and is that being taught in school?
About the magnetic field decreasing in intensity?
The clock showing that the Earth is young, much younger than what.
Well, it's decreasing. The magnetic field's going away, and so it can't be as old as they think because it protects us from remember the ultraviolet light from day one? If you get too much of that through the atmosphere, we're toast. There's almost nothing's being taught in schools that might run against a faith system that I believed in, which was evolution and materialism. We didn't want a God, and we were doing anything we could get rid of it. We will handpick radiometric dating methods that give us longer ages, even if they're bunk. When we look at actual known specimens, they blow up on us. But we would pick these long ones because we needed more time to get even just one protein. You keep adding time. When you were little, you heard dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, right? Or the Earth was a million years old or more. Now what is it? It's billions. The universe is now 13 billion, 14 billion. But we need that, you see, to get some chance in heck of having anything happen by chance. The only thing we had to add to it, since we can't add material energy because we can measure that now, is time. So they're always adding time, and we always added time to try and make something work, to buy ourselves time to prove that this stuff was true. But it's just not, man. And there's no reason to believe any of that radiometric dating stuff is true either. And I could give you great examples of that. Yes, go ahead.
John, would you hold that book up for everybody to see behind you? The reference she's making there is page 42 in that book. It's one little page, and it talks about the evidence on the magnetic shield, and it shows that the Earth is young. So if you want something that's pretty easy to read, I could understand that, and obviously she could. So
what page was that again?
One thing, if that's the only thing you're going to read.
What is it?
Oh, 37. Excuse me. Okay, here you go.
You know how like most babies are born with blue eyes?
Yeah.
What causes their eye color to change? Like,
well, you know, that's a good question too. It has to do with the chemistry in your body and what makes your iris the color that it is. And as you mature, those chemicals flush through your system and they can actually change that. I was born with like blue eyes, and I have green eyes now. So, and our son, I could have sworn he had brown eyes, and he got blue eyes now. So, it's just the chemistry of the human body, and it's just as you mature, especially boys. I'm very familiar with boys because I am one, we raised one, and I teach like 20 some of them in Sunday school that are high school guys. And I can tell you, when they reach an age of about 15 or 16, the chemicals wash over their brain and they just lose all their mind. And then when they're about 17 or 18, girls, they come out of it. And they realize, whoa, I got to put aside the things of the child. Or they just go, no, I like this child thing, and I'm just going to go off and be a bum for the rest of my life, or whatever it is. But there's this chemical thing that changes, especially, and I know it very well in boys. It's like that, only those are hormonal and other things. Yes? It's 8:20, we're still good.
So what is the difference between learning and adaptation?
Learning and adapting. Well, you can learn new things, but you cannot physically change the chemistry of your body or the abilities of the chemistry in your body to do things like become urohaline again, like be able to accept salt if you're a salmon again. If you're genetically triggered that capability off, you can learn how to, I taste salt, I'm swimming the other way. You can learn and survive that way. But you have changed genetically, you've mutated, you've lost that capability. That's totally different. Physically, you can't do it, but you can learn how to live with that. Like people, anybody here diabetic, okay, you learn how to live with it, don't you? Right? But you can't be without insulin anymore.
Isn't this fun? I mean, you're learning stuff, or I am. Anyway, I've been here 36 times, and I'm still learning every night. So.
We did. How many times have we done evolution, though? We just started this
the evolution,
we
we just started it in the last year because we felt like it was important.
We had to do it for
these
kids
guys right over here. We got two
high school
sitting
guys. Yeah, for you guys in high school or college, there was a lot of questions. So it just became part of what we do with.
Okay, you look like you really needs to ask this question, and then I'll get to the assignment.
Well, you're talking about genetics, and I was thinking about gene splicing.
Yes.
What are the dangers of that, and is that kind of pushing evolution?
Oh, it's just totally the most dangerous and heinous thing you can do because we don't understand enough about the information or what all these things do. Remember, 80% of the DNA we thought was junk until just a few years ago. And so we're starting to learn that the timing of things has to happen in just such a way for things to work. And when you start monkeying around with clipping out things like CRISPR babies to make them a girl or a boy, you might be clipping something and make a horrible mistake. And you start playing like that, you're playing God, you're going to pay, it's going to cost us. Okay, I believe that. I believe anytime we're trying to utilize even RNA features to try and get, I'm not in agreement. I'm not a biologist. I'm more of a chemistry guy who's information sciences and whatnot. But just knowing how this works, the machine works, and the odds of them getting that right to deliver something to help you medically or to change a baby, it's sex, that's really dangerous because we just don't know what's going to happen. I'd rather they experiment on, if they had to, a mouse or something, but don't do that on people. Yes.
Gotta go. Okay, look at
6 minutes.
Sheet. Next week, we're going to start on, this has all been wonderful. This has been the creation, and we spent a lot of time on it. This is called Really Positive, what God has done. Next week, we're going to start talking about what we're doing and have done. And so there's 3 judgments that we're going to look at in the next 3 sessions. And the first one is going to be Adam and Eve and their sin and the effects of that sin. And David Penny will be here next week, and we'll talk about that and the implication. You're going to learn a couple things about science again, how important the first 3 chapters in Genesis are to most of the science that exists, and the science that's being used in the world comes from the first 3 chapters in Genesis. So you got to come back to hear about this, okay? So what can you do to kind of prepare yourself? Right up at the top, read the Bible, chapter 3. Try it again, devotional with mom and dad or your kids or something. The New Answers book, there's a good short section. The last chapter in this book is question 26, and it deals with the fall. So it's maybe 6 or 8 or 10 pages, so read that. And then you've got an assignment, if you want to, in chapter 3, in big blue I call it, and 3 pages in blue, 42, 43, and 44. Surely you can do that if you want to. So just a little different perspective on the fall. And then you can watch David Penny on video. Now, at the top up here is genesisacademy.net. Go to that website. Go to Joshua Project Live. Scroll down till Dave is going to be talking, it says, on session 4. And watch the video with this red sweater on about the fall coming from the Bible with some science. So it's all there. One more thing. We want to give a great devotional book, and we had a couple donate these tonight, not tonight, but they donate them to us to give out any high schooler and below. Now, if you've got a son or a daughter that's down wherever they are with child care, grab one of these for them. It's a 365-day devotional book. It's about science and God and the scriptures and how they all fit together. Wonderful pictures. You do 1 page a day. Even as adults, you can do it with your kids. So they're out on the table when you leave, and take one for, if you've got several kids, you can take one for each child that's in child care. Adults, you don't get any tonight, so they're giving these away. One other thing before we leave, Chuck Adams, whoop, right back there, and his wife Sue, who's not here tonight. They come in and help us the first 3 sessions like they have with enrolling you and getting everything organized for you and helping us out. So thank Chuck and Sue for helping us. They won't be here in the next few sessions. So we'll see you all next week. It's not as positive next week from here on out, except at the end. And then we talk about Jesus. All right, we'll see you next week.